Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Greater Pittsburgh's How to Evaluate Judicial Candidates. I'm Chris Berger, and I'll be your host for this evening. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the program. I have previously submitted questions from our audience, and you are welcome to ask a question as well in the chat box. But please remember that the League is a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse, support, or oppose any political party or candidates for office. Therefore, this evening's talk will not focus on individual candidates. And during the Q&A, any questions referring to a particular candidate will not be asked. This event is being recorded and uploaded to our Facebook page as we speak, and it will later appear on our YouTube channel. Our primary ballot will have an overwhelming number of candidates running for judge on all court levels locally and across Pennsylvania. Most of us are not in the position to know if a particular candidate is qualified to be a judge. Our speakers this evening will educate us on what qualifications and qualities to look for in a candidate for a judge, in order for us to make a more informed decision when voting. Caroline Mitchell and Heather Heidelbaugh, who both served together for multiple terms on the Allegheny Bar Association's Judicial Committee, will share their insight on the process of obtaining a judicial bar rating, the bar ratings themselves and what they mean, plus additional considerations in the evaluation of judicial candidates. The goal of this program is to have a more informed electorate in order to ensure the most qualified people get elected to our court. Let me introduce our speakers. Caroline Mitchell has been practicing law in Pittsburgh for 48 years. She has argued cases before all three Pennsylvania appeals courts, the Federal Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court. She has litigated over 100 cases in state and federal courts. She served three-year terms as an elected member of the Allegheny County Bar Association Judicial Committee. She was a founding member of the Allegheny County Bar Association's Civil Rights Committee and is a current member of the ACLU Pittsburgh Lawyers Committee. Heather Heidelbaugh practices law at Leach, Tishman, Fuscaldo, and Lamp in Pittsburgh as an equity partner in the litigation department. She has tried numerous cases and injunctions throughout Pennsylvania and in other states. She served on the county council for 4 years and was a member of the election board review board. She has also practiced election law and advised presidential, senatorial, and state campaigns. In 2020, she was her party's nominee for Pennsylvania Attorney General. She served two 3-year terms as a member of the Allegheny County Bar Association's Judicial Committee and currently chairs U.S. Senator Patrick Toomey's bipartisan federal judicial recommendation panel for federal judges in the Western District. Welcome, and thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. So let's begin by giving our audience an overview of the Bar Association's Judicial Committee. What is it and what does it do? Carolyn?
The Judiciary Committee of the Bar is comprised of 24 lawyers who are theoretically elected by the 6,700 members of the Bar Association. Now, quite frankly, all 6,700 don't usually bother to vote for the Judiciary Committee. When one is elected as a member, the expectation is that you will receive and review the applications of anyone who is intending to run for judge in the Allegheny County court system. You may also be called upon to review the credentials of someone who seeks a federal appointment to the Western District of Pennsylvania. Each county of the 67 in Pennsylvania has bar associations. However, not all of them do judicial candidate ratings. So Allegheny County is quite unique because when we have numerous candidates for judge, a member of the Judiciary Committee can be sitting in the office at about 4 o'clock and have a 500-page packet delivered by the Bar Association containing applications of 6 to 10 people who will each get a half-hour interview in which the committee members can ask questions about the application. This, of course, means that you need to read them and understand what the people are setting forth as their credentials. And so it's a very time-consuming task. It is also one that we take quite seriously because our job as lawyers is to look at our fellow lawyers and see whether we would want that person judging one of our most important or critical cases, because if that person is elected to Common Pleas Court, they will be put into a division and be expected to serve as a judge the minute that they're sworn in. Heather, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, people run for the Judiciary Committee in the bar. There is an election. You serve a 3-year term, cascading, people come off every year. Carolyn served 3 separate 3-year terms, so that's 9 years. I served 2 separate terms, which would be 6, but I recused myself at one point because I became a party official. So I served for 5 years. Generally, the people that are elected to the Judiciary Committee are lawyers who are well known. If their names appear in the judicial legal paper for all of us to vote. I've noticed that the lawyers who have won spots on the Judiciary Committee, certainly in the last decade, have been a very diverse group of lawyers. Not only have they been young and old, they've been lawyers who represent mostly the person suing, or there's also lawyers representing corporations. There's gay and straight lawyers. There are Black and white lawyers. It seems to me over the last decade that it has been a very diverse panel. You would probably agree with that, Carolyn, is that right?
Yes, in the early days, the Judiciary Committee back in the 70s, when I first started to practice, it was predominantly lawyers in the civil division who were dealing with auto accidents and corporate litigation and contracts. And then it was felt that that was very exclusionary because you could have an excellent family lawyer who has many years of practice who would make an outstanding addition to the bench. And so the bar decided to be much more inclusive in terms of what a person's legal experience was, realizing that in Allegheny County, we have 4 divisions. We have the family division, which is support, divorce, marriage type issues. The civil division, which is contracts, personal injury, injunctions, people suing each other for all kinds of reasons. Orphans court, which is the wills and estates. And of course, the criminal division, where the judges have to decide whether someone goes to jail for life. So there's an effort now on the Judiciary Committee to have representatives from each of the 4 practice areas. And I think they've done a very good job of it. They have a broad spectrum of attorneys and they bring a lot of expertise. That being said, each person on the Judiciary Committee has an individual responsibility to read all of the applications, to examine the person's briefs. If, for example, I see a brief and it's full of typos and full of terrible grammar, and maybe has cases that don't relate to the subject matter, I would really question whether that person has the capability to be a judge ruling on other people's cases. So the applications and the documents submitted are very important.
Right.
So maybe we should take a look now at what the Judiciary Committee's credentials are for the various ratings. Highly recommended, recommended, not recommended at this time, and unqualified. So let's look at highly recommended first. What type of candidate is likely to get a highly recommended? Generally, it's a person who has a lot of experience and has demonstrated outstanding legal ability. Now, outstanding legal ability can mean you are a member of, in the plaintiff's bar, the $1 Million Advocates Club. You're a person who has won a big and important verdict for your client. You can be a member of the Allegheny County Trial Lawyers Association or the Academy of Trial Lawyers. You can be rated by Martindale-Hubbell at their highest rating, which is AV. And generally, a person who is highly recommended has been in practice for quite some time and has an excellent reputation in the field. When I was on the Judiciary Committee, one of the things that I did was to examine the 5 cases that the applicant was referencing as their most important case. And I would call the opposing counsel and I would say, I see that you've litigated against so-and-so who's applying for a judiciary rating. Can you share any observations with me as to what that person was like as an opponent? I mean, there are codes of conduct for lawyers. You're not supposed to be late. You're not supposed to be rude. You're not supposed to misrepresent the facts or the law. And if I hear from an adversary that this person has not obeyed the rules, I'm going to really wonder whether that person deserves even a recommended rating. What are your thoughts on this, Heather?
I agree, Carolyn. You know, when you and I served on the Judiciary Committee, you were an extraordinary member of the committee because you did take your duties very seriously, and you would research people, and you added an enormous amount of value to the confidential communications that we had on the Judiciary Committee. We'd get there about 5 o'clock. Sometimes we would go till 11 o'clock at night going over everyone. And you have to be careful to, you know, not have considerations about idle gossip or a one-off where somebody maybe had a bad day. So the thing I'd like to throw out at this point in our discussion is that every year the Judiciary Committee is comprised of different people. So what we have found over the years is some years the ratings will be really tough. You know, to get to highly recommended, you really have to be an exemplary lawyer. And you have to have really hit all 4 of those criteria. There are other years where, in our opinion, because Carolyn and I have discussed this, the makeup of the committee would maybe give a highly recommended to someone that in other years would never have gotten that rating. So there is not a consistency over the years because different members, different lawyers are on the Judiciary Committee.
Well, there was another tactic that was used in the past with regard to highly recommended, and that was that a candidate would come in, and prior to the interview with the committee, we would be inundated with 35 letters from politicians and prominent lawyers and senators and people that were completely foreign to law practice in Allegheny County, urging us to vote certain ways on candidates. And those sorts of extraneous influences were, shall we say, frowned upon to the point that now it is absolutely not permitted. So
the other thing I wanted to say at the beginning of this, Carolyn, was the thing that you and I always talk about because we've been friends for so many years. You know, I'm at one end of the political spectrum and you are at the other, and we both agree on that. But we also agree that I don't think we have ever disagreed on the rating for a judicial candidate because the ratings have to do with that person's legal ability, not with their partisan philosophies.
Yeah, and just as an aside on that, you know, the highly recommended rating means that you also have the integrity and the temperament to serve as a judge. So if you're an eminent legal scholar that you are short-tempered and you are difficult to deal with, it's not likely that you're going to get a highly recommended. So when we go down to the next level, recommended, the old rule was that you really need to be in practice for about 10 years before people on the committee would feel comfortable having the candidate as a judge in one of their important trials. And now that seems to be an unspoken rule for the Allegheny County Judiciary Committee, in that if someone comes in and they've been practicing for a short time, they could be a very good judge in the future, but this is not the sort of person that you might want to hand a case to right off the bat. So a recommended candidate is a solid lawyer. They have utmost integrity, and they have temperament that is good. Now, recommended in my mind is a person that I would be happy having on the bench tomorrow for one of my most important or valuable cases, for a case where someone might end up with a first-degree murder conviction. One of the most important cases in your life as a lawyer, you would be happy having it in front of a person who's either highly recommended or recommended. So Heather, what do you do about the issue of the quote, utmost integrity factor, which is a requirement for highly recommended and also for recommended?
Well, you know, we had so many discussions about this, and if in the committee, there was a consensus that the lawyer had been untruthful to their opposing counsel or had been untruthful to the court, they couldn't get a recommended. In the years we served, untruthfulness, which would be an integrity issue, obviously, would get an unqualified rating. The other thing that we're jumping over a little bit, but you know, integrity, when you are an officer of the court as a lawyer, that is your first duty, and then to your clients. You have to, even when you have to admit that the case goes against you, you have to be completely truthful with the court and with opposing counsel. And so if that is not your history, typically you cannot get a recommended or highly recommended.
Now, one of the most important things in either highly recommended or recommended is the person's temperament. And the difficulty that we have in assessing judicial candidates, if you're not sitting there on one of these committees, is that a person in the community might be difficult and abrasive and crabby and rude, but the minute that they turn into judicial candidates, they become mellow and kind. And so it's very difficult if you only see the person making a stump speech as a judicial candidate. You don't really know what's this person going to be like on the bench. Now, Heather and I have both seen judges who were very difficult to deal with, difficult in the sense of short-tempered, difficult to deal with on extensions of time, difficult threatening sanctions for doing things the best way you knew how. And interestingly, those judges were ones that as lawyers demonstrated those same characteristics. So the temperament factor in my mind is a very key factor in whether or not this person should be on the bench. And that's going to be a tough thing to evaluate if you're looking at 39 people who are running for these judicial slots, because candidates are usually only seen at candidate type events. So I have no solution for that. So let's talk about the dreaded NRATT, not recommended at this time. This is a person who is generally a pretty good lawyer, but doesn't really have enough time in the saddle to have the committee members believe that this person would be a competent judge. I've had situations where I've had major cases in front of judges who did not have very much legal experience when they were appointed to judicial positions. And it was dreadful because the rules of evidence and the rules of procedure that were to govern the case seemed to be lacking. And so it makes the counsel work extra hard. It terrifies the client because the judge can throw the case out and then you have an expensive appeal or you've lost for life. So if a candidate for judge doesn't have solid courtroom experience or experience in, for instance, trying family division support cases, family division PFAs, divorce and custody, complex litigation, if they don't have solid experience doing the actual litigation of those cases, I would have to not recommend them because I would not want that person sitting on an important case of mine.
Yeah, I think I just add that I'd like to just state the obvious for the record. If you're not a lawyer and you don't regularly appear in the judicial system, you may not understand in a substantial way how important the role of the judge is. They're deciding whether children are going to stay with their parents or are going to be taken away from their parents. They're deciding whether someone's going to retain their liberty or their liberty is going to be not denied them. They're deciding whether a quadriplegic is going to have evidence come in to sustain their case or that evidence is going to stay out. One of the types of cases that I did for years and years was products liability. And in those type of cases, not only do you have to understand trial law, but you have to understand evidence, engineering, complicated medicine, because they're usually catastrophic injuries. And these are cases which are going to change not only the person's life or the company's existence, but these are catastrophic cases. And so what everyone in the process is desirous of is the very best people to serve as judges, people who have devoted their life to their profession and to acquiring very difficult skills. They call it obviously the practice of law. Everybody likes to make a joke, so you don't have it right yet. Carolyn is one of the finest attorneys that you will ever meet. She's been practicing for 48 years, and she would probably say every day she learned something new. And so in order to be a judge with so much power, so much authority, and really very little oversight, they're independent in what they can do. The electorate really needs to vote in the very best they can.
And now we come to the dreadful rating of unqualified. The unqualified rating is really one that says you are never going to possess the credentials that would cause the Judiciary Committee to want you as a judge on one of their cases. The unqualified rating is typically reserved for people who have committed some fairly egregious violations of the rules or the protocol of the court. And for instance, if a person has a reputation in the community for making sexually harassing statements or racially biased statements, and that comes to the attention of the committee, is that something that is curable? Would you want a judge that has bigotry or prejudice? That, in my mind, is an absolute unqualified rating. We go to law school. We are supposed to study the law. We're supposed to respect the law. And if we have a judge who shows any sign of bigotry or sexual harassment, I don't want that person on the bench. You may be familiar with the scandal at the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania with elected justices of the Supreme Court exchanging emails that were sexually derogatory and racially derogatory. We would not want a person like that on the bench. That person, in my mind, would get an unqualified. Similarly, if there's a lawyer with a reputation in the community for not being truthful in pleadings or for abusing the legal system, particularly if the person coming in is fighting a landlord-tenant case and the lawyer for the defendant landlord starts to take advantage procedurally of an unrepresented litigant. If we on the committee know that that sort of thing has occurred, that person is going to get an unqualified. And when I was on the Judiciary Committee, I looked at the court records. I would pull the lawyer up by name. I would examine what types of cases this person was involved in. And if I saw a pattern developing of someone being abusive to unrepresented clients at magistrate hearings, or a pattern of lateness in front of justices, it used to be a justice of the peace, now it's a magisterial district judge, that would cause me to believe that this person might not ever have the ability to serve as a judge. One example, a person came in and before the Judiciary Committee claimed that they were forbidden to do pro bono practice, which was rather astonishing since our disciplinary rules and canons of ethics for lawyers say that pro bono is an obligation of a member of the bar. Well, this person indicated that they weren't allowed to do pro bono. Their employer wouldn't let them. Unfortunately, that candidate had submitted a brief written for a paying client. And so the interesting question was, you're not permitted to do pro bono by your employer, but you're allowed to take cases for money? That person would not get a qualified rating, and in fact, did not get a qualified rating, was rated unqualified for life. So that's a rating that is very serious and one that is not often handed out. You have to do something pretty bad to get unqualified. So what are your thoughts on that, Heather?
I agree. That rating wasn't handed out very often, and that was a tough rating to give. But there were occasions in which we owed a duty to the community to make that tough call and rate that person unqualified, because our duty, we felt, was to the community at large.
So let's look at the next series of slides. And what we need to talk about now is how the Pennsylvania Bar Association evaluates its candidates. The Pennsylvania Bar has 10 qualifications. The PBA evaluates judges who are running for statewide seats, and the statewide appellate seats would be the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Superior Court, which handles civil litigation and criminal appeals, the Commonwealth Court, which handles administrative law matters like unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, zoning, and so forth. So when a lawyer decides to run statewide for one of the appellate benches, the lawyer is typically evaluated by the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which has a statewide judicial committee comprised of lay persons and also practicing lawyers. And the credentials that you're about to see now are the Pba Credentials. The PBA has a two-part investigative situation where there is a panel that initially meets with a candidate and assesses their credentials. And the next full commission hearing is before all of the members who can make it. So the legal ability credential is the number one issue. If you're on an appellate court like Superior Court, your main job is to see if a trial judge made an error that is so serious that somebody deserves a new trial. Let's say you have a medical malpractice case where there are already $100,000 out in expert witness fees, and doctors saying, yes, there's malpractice, doctors saying, no, there's no malpractice. And let's say the trial judge throws the case out before it goes to the jury. Well, the plaintiff's lawyer will not be happy. They would decide to take an appeal to the Superior Court, or the reverse might happen. The plaintiff gets a $5 million verdict. The defense attorney says the trial judge has made an error and I'm going to appeal it. So the appellate court lawyers have very difficult legal and procedural arguments to make to a panel of an appellate court. For instance, Superior Court typically sits in 3-judge panels, or if it is a case that is extremely important, they will sit en banc with all 9 of the Superior Court justices sitting to listen to the argument. So legal ability for a judge on the appellate bench is absolutely crucial. And that's one of the reasons that this is the number one credential for PBA. Now, suffice it to say that if a trial judge has opinions that are not particularly well reasoned, or have grammatical errors or strange lines of thought, that person would not be considered as a very good candidate for an appellate bench, because clear and precise and correct legal writing of opinions is very important as a credential for the appellate bench. The second criteria, if you're going to be on the appellate court trying to judge whether a judge has made a fair decision under the law, you need to have a considerable amount of experience. And so if a candidate is running, for example, for Commonwealth Court and has never tried a workers' compensation case or an unemployment compensation case or a zoning case, the question is, does that person have the experience for that bench? A similar situation, if you're going to run for the Superior Court, you should have substantial civil or criminal litigation experience. Many of the Superior Court judges are retired from jobs as district attorneys or prosecuting attorneys, where they've been trying cases in a criminal courtroom for 20 years. So trial experience is absolutely key there. Do you have anything to add about that, Heather?
No, I think that you're right. I would say, though, there are a lot of people who run for these appellate courts that are professorial, or they are appellate lawyers. They won't have that trial experience, but they've reviewed trial transcripts. And so, in my opinion, even though that wouldn't necessarily, check all the boxes for the PBA, they would be a qualified candidate.
The next one is the record and reputation for character and integrity. Now, the PBA has an oath which they require of judicial candidates, and that is that there shall be no negative advertising slamming your opponent. The ACBA does not have such a requirement, but we've never needed to enforce it. The PBA takes it very seriously as to whether a candidate for the appellate bench has been engaged in slamming other candidates, criticizing their experience or credentials or what have you. And they have, in fact, negatively rated judges on the integrity aspect if they find that that judge has violated the oath to do no negative advertising. So here again, it's a statewide race. And so the PBA Judicial Commission has to look to what the person's reputation is in the community where they were a trial judge, which is a tough thing to assess. Now, the next issue, financial responsibility. Financial responsibility involves, do you pay your taxes on time? Have you ever been sued for mortgage foreclosure? Have you ever been sued for not paying a contractor and losing the case and having the judge say you owed that money and you should have paid it? So financial responsibility is very important. And one of the reasons it's important is that if you're a judge and you know there's $1 million case ahead of you, are you going to be tempted to say to the lawyer, well, you know, if you and I had a few conversations, I could help you to try this case better? We, in fact, unfortunately had an Allegheny County judge who was convicted in the federal district court of extortion for offering assistance to a lawyer who had some very valuable cases in front of him. And the lawyer very responsibly went straight to the FBI. The FBI wired the lawyer, and that member of the Allegheny County bench repeated the extortion under wire and was promptly indicted and later convicted. So a person's finances become relevant. You know, you don't want someone presiding over $1 million cases who does not have the utmost of integrity and financial responsibility in his or her private life. The next credential, the judicial temperament. Trials are very high stress. A person who comes in as a witness might end up being involved in an auto accident the morning of the trial, making that person late. You don't want a judge who abuses a witness for being late for no fault of that person's own. You want a judge who is patient and courteous and has a sense that sometimes things go wrong. I was in a trial once using my favorite fountain pen when I suddenly dumped ink all over my paperwork, all over the table. And the judge, who was a very kind and well-respected federal judge, looked at me and smiled and said, I think it might be an appropriate time to take our morning recess. Now, what he could have done is been absolutely horrid. How could you be so stupid as to use ink in a fountain pen bottle? But he was so kind and so judicious about that. And I can think of time and time again where excellent judges have really made a difference in how a witness felt. I remember a sexual harassment trial where my witness, the victim, broke down on the witness stand and was just sobbing. And the judge said, this is an appropriate time for a break. He then called defense counsel and myself into chambers and said, I suggest that you put a settlement offer on the table. I have heard enough. And sure enough, the case settled. The jury was dismissed. And the judge came over to this client who was an absolute basket case and held his hand out and said, I'm sorry you went through that. I hope that things will be better for you in your life. I mean, a kind and dignified and compassionate person, and also one who was a brilliant jurist. That's what we want in our judges. The next one, mental and physical capacity. This is a tricky one. What if a judge is blind? Does that mean that the judge has less capacity to do the job? The mental and physical capacity really dances around the issue of, does this person have a drug and alcohol problem? Has it been rehabilitated, or is it something that would be a problem? If the person has difficulties with mental health issues, that's something that in the mind of the PBA is going to be something that is taken seriously into account. The Allegheny County Bar Association has a confidential portion of the questionnaire where they attempt to ascertain whether a person has the sort of impairment that might cause them to not be able to serve competently. But that is something that no one is entitled to access. That's a confidential portion. Next, the community involvement. We all know that most people, judges and non-judicial candidates, get involved in their children's activities. Getting involved as your kid's soccer coach is certainly a fine community activity, but what the PBA is looking for here is something which is far more extensive than just something that serves the interests of your own family. And that would be, have you done things in your professional life that really better the community and the legal system? So that's a factor also for the ACBA. For the appellate courts, the administrative ability of the candidate is significant. If you're on a trial bench in Philadelphia or in Allegheny County, and you have a lot of cases coming in, and you have to assign prosecutors and defense attorneys to various courtrooms, and you're doing a really good job of it, that's a factor that they will take into account. The devotion to justice, what has the person done in the way of public speaking or seminars, so on and so forth. And number 10, sound judgment in one's professional life. If you're a judge and you're involved in a really bitter, nasty divorce, that's the sort of thing that might cause persons to doubt whether you would be a good judge. So sound judgment in one's professional life. Do you have DWI convictions? Do you have tax liens against you? Do you have a series of failed corporations or a bankruptcy here and there? Those sorts of professional attributes are very important if you are going to be on the bench ruling on other people's problems. Now, the last one, the one that is the most difficult for practicing lawyers, is, does the judge diligently keep to a schedule, or does the judge stroll in at 10:30 in the morning, having just spent an hour and a half at the gym while an entire courtroom of people wait for a hearing? There was a judge on the Court of Common Pleas out of Wilkes-Barre, and after this person was elected to the bench, the difficulty was that this person would never show up on time. She would keep lawyers waiting. She would keep judges waiting. She would be doing nothing but sitting, chatting in her courtroom. Finally, the bar in that county reported her to the Judicial Inquiry and Review Board, which is the judges supervising judges. They held hearings, and lawyer after lawyer came in and said she was rude. She never showed up on time. She kept people waiting. And the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania threw her off of the bench permanently and forever, and she lost her pension. So procedural deadlines, whether you are in court when you say you're going to be in court, whether you respect somebody else's time, That's very important. So now that we know what we're looking for in a judge, let's look at the next set of slides, which are how do you find the ratings on the people that you want to consider voting for. And we have, for the Allegheny County Bar Association, various links. You can pull up the link that will be on the League of Women Voters screen, and that link will show you the candidate's application, which is public, and there will also be a list of the ratings of the individuals. There's also the same link available for the Pennsylvania Bar Association judges. Anything to add, Heather?
Well, I guess this is a good time to say that we as lawyers are required, especially those of us who engage in public service, to assist the public in respecting the judiciary. And so many lawyers are ethically bound to be careful in regard to certainly their comments about the judiciary, because we want to uphold the judiciary in terms of trusting that third branch of government. So we have the ACBA ratings, we have the Pba ratings, but I think that even despite the fact that we are obviously required to be circumspect in terms of any criticism of the judiciary, I can certainly state that I don't agree with all of the ACBA ratings. I don't agree with all of the Pba ratings. I agree with some of them. You know, that was true when I was on the Judiciary Committee. We had a Democratic vote. So I'm a voter. I know a little bit more probably about some of these judicial candidates than some of you, because you don't practice every day. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is, well, how do you vote for judge? And we've gone through and we've given you sort of the basis for the ACBA judiciary ratings. We've given you how people are rated, what most lawyers believe to be important in a judge, but it isn't the only source of information. It's one source of information, just like really anything in life. It's an important source, though. But if you find out, we're going to talk about this more explicitly, but if you, for instance, had a regular interaction with candidate A and you found them to be intemperate, yet they received the highest rating, I don't think it would be beyond the pale for you to make your own decision and say, you know, I understand that many people may have found candidate A to be in conformance with the ratings, but I do not, and therefore I would not cast my vote for that person. So one of the things we're going to talk about is other pieces of information that you can look at in making your decision.
Yeah, I would add that I am not going to walk into the polls with the lists of HRs and Rs and then just vote automatically for the 9. I think that set of ratings is just one of the factors that you would use, and you need to use your judgment on the people that you know and vote accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you both for the wonderful discussion. We had some questions that were submitted upon registration, so I'm going to ask a few of these before we wrap up. One of the questions is, why is the number of years practicing weighed more heavily than quality of service and accomplishments?
Well, the number of years practicing tells me what the person's experience is in being able to competently apply the rules of procedure and evidence to my case. And if a person is a wonderful candidate with excellent community service, but hasn't been practicing law enough to know when a serious legal issue is confronting the litigants, I don't want that person as a judge. I mean, a trial is a defense lawyer and a plaintiff's lawyer, each making the best case under the law and under the ethical obligations for his or her client. If I have a judge who doesn't know the hearsay rule and they let in stuff to a jury that fatally prejudices my case, I'm looking at $50,000 of appeal cost. I'm looking at a client who may never get a dime for the serious personal injury. I cannot take the risk that a nice person in the community sits on that bench on one of my most important cases. I will not vote for a person for judge unless I would be comfortable having that person handle a case very important to me and my clients. And so in my own mind, I have an absolute cutoff. If you have not been in practice for 10 years, I don't want you as a judge. You might be a nice person. You might be a wonderful human being doing all kinds of community service. You might be an excellent administrator in some capacity, but I don't want you as my trial judge. And I certainly do not want you on an appellate court. There are candidates who run for appellate court seats because, hey, there's 3 seats up and we're out of a community which has a lot of grassroots support. So I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and I'm going to see if I might be able to get myself one of those appellate court seats. I think that is a disservice to the legal community.
One of the things I'd like to offer is something I always talk about in my law firm. You go to law school and it's 3 years and you take a semester course in property. Then you sit for the bar exam, which is a survey of your knowledge, and you have to pass the bar to practice. I tell the young people that work for me that not until they're 5 years out are they allowed to handle a case totally by themselves. So that's really 8 years of legal training. I heavily supervise all the lawyers who work under me. I look at everything that they do, the pleadings, the correspondence, everything. I don't think until you're 10 years out, should you really be trying a case by yourself. It's so complicated, maybe a simple case, but there's so much at stake. So there's just so much to know for the law. It takes a long time to learn it.
Okay, thank you. Another question from previous submitted questions. Do all candidates ask the Bar Association to rate them? If not, why not?
I can start with that if you want, or go ahead,
Go,
Kelly.
go right ahead, Heather.
They don't, not all candidates do. And I think that each candidate has a different reason for doing so. About 15 years ago, there was sort of this feeling in the community that the committee was too partisan. And so certain people of certain political affiliations wouldn't go in front of the committee. And I disagreed with that heartily. I don't think it's a political committee, and I don't think they concentrate on the partisanship. Some people don't go in front of the committee because of what we've just been saying about experience. They don't have experience as a lawyer, but what Allegheny County does is they rate them anyway. So it's better to sort of go in front of the committee, or there's just a whole host of reasons. Maybe they have something that they have to reveal in one of those questions that they hope that'll be missed. They don't want to reveal it. So,
well, there's another factor too, which is that the people who are on the Judiciary Committee are generally lawyers who have done a lot of litigation in whichever of the 4 areas of court they specialize. So if you're a candidate and you say, oh, gee, look who's on that committee. The guy that I had as the defense attorney on that case where I really screwed up the jury instructions, the candidate might say, I don't think I want to go in front of that committee because that person will vote against me and say I did a terrible job. Well, if you don't go in front of the committee, the lawyer who thought you did a terrible job is going to tell the committee that, whether you're there or not, to defend yourself. So I think that it is generally not a good idea to refuse to appear because you will be evaluated. We as lawyers and you as members of the public, you can log into the Allegheny County court system, dcr.pa.gov. You can look up by name people. You can see what kind of cases they've been involved in. You can look up who's paid their taxes and who's gone bankrupt and who's had nasty litigation with other people. So this is not something secret that members of the Judiciary Committee only know. Anybody can look up anybody nowadays to find out whether that person is a person who you would want to consider.
And you know, the other thing is, which is really simple, which we didn't have when we were young, is you can go on public Facebook, you can go on Twitter, you can go on Google, you can investigate a person. People are pretty public nowadays, and sometimes they don't take those things down. We know that from doing depositions of people.
What was that site you said again, Carolyn?
Yeah, it's called DCR, Department of Court Records. If you Google Allegheny County Department of Court Records, the website will come up, and then they will say to you, do you wish to create a free public login? And you will say yes. And then they give you a password, and you can actually search by litigant name. So, if you have a landlord and your landlord is not being very nice to you, you go put in the landlord's name and see how many other tenants have been gypped out of their security deposit. It's a public system. It's across the state of Pennsylvania. Anybody can access it.
Right, that's good information. We did have a question from Facebook with somebody saying, I'm just a regular voter. I do not personally know candidates. Most of what I know is from TV commercials and mailers, and how do I find out what the record is? So that's a great way of doing that. So I put it in the chat for everybody if you want to look at that. Another question from Facebook. Why has the ACBA rated judicial candidates for the Pennsylvania Superior and Supreme Courts? So for the statewide.
Well, it's the option of a bar association whether to rate people who are running for the appellate courts. And in the case of people who are our local candidates, we have local candidates and we know those people as judges and as candidates for the appellate bench. So we rate them, and they typically cooperate and bring their credentials in and get rated.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can a candidate who has already served on the bench get a not recommended rating by the bar? Why or why not?
Oh, yes, they can. There would be a number of reasons. When a judge is elected to the bench in a county court, you're elected for a 10-year term. If sometime during your 10-year term, you're indicted by a federal grand jury, that is likely to weigh heavily as to whether you will be NR, not recommended, or unqualified. Because remember that once you're elected for a 10-year term, unless you're convicted of a felony, you are serving that term. So we have people, particularly more in the Philadelphia area, thank heavens, where these are sitting judges who were indicted in the Philadelphia traffic ticket fixing scandal, and they sat on the bench and they were eligible to run for retention, and they were going to get evaluated by their bar association. Fortunately, once you have a felony conviction, you're thrown off the bench by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but anybody can run. We've had judges who have been accused of crimes while they were judges, and that becomes generally known in the legal community. Anything that would render a person unqualified as a candidate would be grounds to have someone who's a sitting judge evaluated as not recommended or unqualified. So if you suspect something like that, the best source of information about things like that is actually the newspaper archives across the state: Philadelphia Inquirer, Post-Gazette, Tribune Review, Erie Times Dispatch. All of the newspapers are very anxious to publish allegations nowadays.
Anything to add to that, Heather?
No, I mean, we've unfortunately had more than you would think of problems with sitting members of the judiciary. And, you know, you look at the questions that our Bar Association and the Pennsylvania Bar Association asks of the candidates and asks the committees to consider of the candidates, it's because these are the issues that have raised their head. You know, we had a horrible, one of the things that made me the most sick as a lawyer, Kids for Cash up in the Northeast, where you had two judges who were accepting money to put juveniles into a private prison. And so, you know, the thought about asking financial questions is there's a set fee for a judge, you know, a set salary, lower than some would make in the private sector. And so you want to know, is this a type of personality of a spender? They have to keep up with the Joneses, because there would be a lot of pressure to accept money, a bribe, and extortion, with catastrophic results in that case. You want to know whether people are currently having difficulty with drugs or alcohol, because we had a situation in Washington County where a judge was actually consuming the cocaine in the evidence locker. So, you know, once again, these are very, very important questions. And because we have elected judges, we're trying to put a screen in there to give some information to the electorate, because it is very difficult for people who are not in the system to know who to vote for.
Thank you. Another question came from Facebook. To what extent is there a clear point of demarcation between Democrat and Republican candidates? In other words, what, if anything, differentiates judicial candidates from both parties?
Well, I will say that in Allegheny County, there is one elected Republican, that's Jill Rangos. To my knowledge, all of the other judges are Democrats. It's almost impossible in Allegheny County, unless you have enormous financial wherewithal, to get elected as a Republican. There will be, when you go into the voting booth, if we used to have voting booths, now we have write-ins, there will be people cross-registered. So you know, the regular public says, wait a minute, this person is registered or is on the ballot as a Democrat, and they're also on the ballot as a Republican. What are they? That's a public record. You can check that. You can check what their true registration is. You know, I have found when I was a young lawyer, and there were a couple of Republican judges, I have found that a person's affiliation in the trial court didn't seem to make much difference. Even some of the most progressive or left-leaning judges, you know, I didn't think they had a philosophy, certainly as a person, and even as they approached the law, but I didn't feel that typically that interfered in my ability, if I was representing a corporation, to get a fair trial and to get rulings which were pursuant to law. There's exceptions to all of that. You know, there are judges who bring their political philosophy to the bench, and they have one political philosophy, and that's the way it's going to be. And you better know that when you're advising your client.
The other thing is that the Pennsylvania Election Code states that judges and school board members are theoretically to be nonpartisan. So therefore, a candidate can cross-file. A Democrat can file for the Republican nomination for judge. A Republican can file for a school board seat running on the Democratic ticket and also the Republican ticket. It depends whether you have enough voters who will sign your nominating petition to put you on the ballot. Now, one of the things that I've seen happen, which is problematic in my opinion, is that if you have a candidate with a whole lot of money or a whole lot of political support across the board, those candidates typically have the means to cross-file for judge. That doesn't mean that they are a Republican. They're usually Democrats with a vast amount of resources. So it's an interesting problem. We might also talk a little bit about the political endorsements, where a person who's running for judge has endorsements from all kinds of people. In my mind, that is not a factor of whether I think this person will be a competent judge. And in fact, it might be a negative factor, because someone with a huge amount of political support might have reason to not be as impartial if one of their major political donors shows up in the courtroom. And so I tend to discount the heavily politically endorsed people, but that's just my personal view. It's certainly not a judiciary committee issue.
And I think that the reality here in Allegheny County has been, and Carolyn, please correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that for many, many years, if you were a registered Democrat and you went through the party endorsement and there was a slate card, that you pretty much won. And that was, there was a political endorsement that I don't think went through all the things that the Judiciary Committee or the PBA select committees would go through. They made a political decision, but those folks typically won.
The thing that distresses me most about the state of Democratic politics is that back in the 50s, it was a closed system where the top guys, the county commissioners, designated their slate of people that they wanted to be judges. And those were the people that always ended up getting elected. When the Bar Association started to evaluate people, there was a bit of dismay because, well, if the Democratic Party endorses a person, that should be sufficient to get that person on the bench. So the Bar Association ratings, unfortunately, come out after the Allegheny County Democratic Committee endorsements. And so Allegheny County Democratic Committee can put together a slate of, quote, endorsed candidates, some of whom are possibly going to be rated as unqualified or not recommended. Now, what kind of sense does that make? I'm very troubled by the existence of these problems in the current evaluation and endorsement system, even to the point that I agree with Mike Doyle, who says, get rid of the Allegheny County Democratic endorsements because we should not be doing that. So that's on another topic.
So what other kinds of tools then do you think should be created to evaluate judicial candidates? Do you have anything in mind that you would create or you would like to see created to evaluate these candidates?
I would like to see a much more intense evaluation by the county bar of the credentials that are being assessed by the PA bar. I would like to see a more intense investigation of finances, of possible conflicts of interest with regard to outside corporations or businesses or partnerships that the people might be involved in. I'm not comfortable with just having a candidate apply and give credentials which say, I've never been sued. I mean, one of the questions is, have you been sued by a client? Well, that's a very key question. If you have someone who's had half a dozen lawsuits by disgruntled clients, isn't that something that the public should know? I mean, right now we have a cumbersome system where we're getting 500 pages of stuff on candidates, including 35-page briefs. And we are trying to filter something like that. And we might or might not have the time to call opposing clients and call opposing counsel. I think there has to be a much more transparent system with, for instance, points scored. If you were going into a horse race, you could see that so-and-so has won so many races and so-and-so's track speed is thus and so. We don't have anything except a 1 or 2 noun rating on these candidates. Traditionally, the Judiciary Committee would not tell the candidate why you got an NRATT or why you got an unqualified, because the ratings were supposed to be confidential. Well, in fact, the ratings weren't confidential. I particularly recall one candidate who got one of the lowest ratings ever given by the Bar Association. Our ratings were supposed to be anonymous and confidential. The next day at my office shows up a messenger from the law firm of the candidate with a letter that was very vituperative and critical of the decision of the committee. Completely out of line, completely difficult. So I think we need a better rating system. For instance, the Allegheny County Bar Association rates judges, and they rate them on qualities like diligence, i.e., do you start court on time so that people can actually get out of there and get back to their jobs? Or are you a guy walking down the street at 11 o'clock in the morning from the YWCA while a bunch of people wait in your courtroom? The evaluations by the Bar Association of sitting judges are numerical ratings, like give this judge anywhere from 1 to 5 on legal ability. And you give like, oh, I'm going to give that judge a 3.5. Well, now, what does that tell a member of the public? I mean, like, is that a D or is that a B plus? I mean, the evaluation systems that we have right now do not do a good job of letting people who are voters know who would make a good judge. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I don't know who's going to do it, quite frankly.
Heather, do you have any?
Yes, my opinion is that from 30,000 feet, looking at the current ratings, that I think what has happened is the ratings reflect people's regard for people as human beings. And they have failed to focus on the two most important things, in my opinion: experience and temperament. If you have a very experienced jurist candidate with an even temperament, everybody can get mad, but an even temperament, you're going to have justice in your community. If you have people that are popular or well-liked or have acquired a name, but have no experience and questionable temperament, you're going to have a failure in your justice system. And the people that are going to suffer the most are the poor.
Couldn't say it better, Heather. You are absolutely correct. You know, the difficulty with running for judge is that your views on social issues are not supposed to be part of the evaluation system. If you remember, the Supreme Court hearings on justices being proposed for appointment. They were not permitted to say, well, I would rule in such and such a fashion on a right to pretrial detention. But in our local races, we have a number of social justice issues which have come up. And I think it is untoward of a candidate to be addressing how I would rule on this or that social issue. I mean, that is not what is permissible under the canons of judicial ethics. You are not supposed to say, well, I'm a defense attorney and I think that we need to throw out all first-degree homicide cases because nobody should be subject to the death penalty. It's a very popular thing nowadays to run. If you're a DA, you run on a law and order, put everybody in jail. If you're a public defender, you run on a platform of you're putting too many people in jail, or you're not giving enough bail, or you're giving too much bail. I think that it is not relevant what a person's social justice views are, because judges are forbidden to foreshadow what their decisions would be. I mean, it is very troubling to me that we have so much of the social justice argument being made by candidates for the bench.
Well, and the concluding thought on that is because it's the third branch of government. The law says what it says. If you want to change the law, become a legislator, which is fine. We could all change the law, but a judge is supposed to follow the law, whether you like it yourself or you don't.
Thank you. That you answered our last question before I even asked it. So there was a question on how important is a judge's position on cash bail and probation. And basically, I believe you just answered that. So without any more questions, we'll talk a little bit about where we can get some more information. As a voter, you can go to other places to find out what we talked about this evening, and Emily has put them up in the chat. You can see the websites that we used today were from the Allegheny County Bar Association and the PA Bar Association at votesmart.com. The League of Women Voters has a vote411.org. It is a virtual candidates guide. You put in your address and only the candidates that will appear on your ballot May 18th will come up. They have answered 3 questions that were posed to them by the league, and you can compare their answers and use that as a basis on whether or not you would like to vote for that person. In conjunction with this evening's event, we have uploaded to the League of Women Voters website under Common-Please a virtual candidate video gallery. Because there were so many candidates running, 39 on the ballot for Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, it was going to be too difficult to have a forum, or we would have to host multiple forums. So we posed 2 questions to the candidates and had them tape themselves and send us their video. So they are speaking in their own words for 2 minutes. So you can go to our website and you can watch all of them, or if you're only interested in seeing a couple of them, you can do that as well. If anything else to add, any other more information sites that voters can go to, Heather or Caroline?
I think you've covered it all, and this is such a great public service by the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. And thank you both again for joining us. And I want to thank everybody else for joining us this evening too. And please remember to vote May 18th by mail, in person, or vote by mail starting, I think people are starting to receive their ballots and mail-in ballots in Allegheny County. So please remember to vote, and good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you very much.